This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
Wait, I've got one. Do you believe in life after love?
I can feel something inside me saying that I really don't think you're strong enough. That's what I believe.
How about I believe I can fly? That's also a song.
Great to have you back on the podcast, everyone. I missed this.
I'm sure that the podcast openings have been absolutely shithouse since I've been gone.
That's
no
true.
zingers.
That's very true.
Yeah.
No zingers.
I'm back, baby. It's obviously Serious Danger, podcast about green politics in Australia. And it's the first Patreon episode since I stopped doing a weekly episode, which means I'm back to do the Patreon episode for you, my dear Danger Dog. You are the person that makes this show possible. You make it happen. So thanks for doing that.
We've got such a great episode with you. We're talking to Sean Kelly, the author of the latest quarterly essay. It is called The Good Fight. What does Labor stand for?
What does Labor stand for? He's a former Labor advisor himself.
Yes, he's been there.
So we just yell at each other the whole interview. And
Sean's great. He wrote this great book about Scott Morrison years ago that I found really insightful and great. I think he's just a very clear thinker. Yes, he's a little bit more sympathetic to the Labor cause than perhaps we are. But I thought this essay, I don't know what you thought. I thought the essay is pretty damning about where Labor is at. It's it tries to, in good faith, interrogate why it might be the case that the Albanese government is more bold. But again, it's a pretty much like, we should know what these people stand for, and we don't seem to. I don't know if you feel like that.
No, I think it's very much like I feel as though it's reflective of where a lot of former or even current Labor people might be sitting at the moment, which is why I think it's very much worthwhile having on the podcast. Should we just jump into it? Should we hit play?
Just before we do, a very quick thing we didn't get to.
What?
With Sean, that I thought in the essay, did you clock this bit? Jim Chalmers, like Keating, talks of not wasting time. He will stop meetings to get people to listen to the clock in his office ticking.
Yeah, I didn't understand that. That sounds like a waste of time to me. If someone stopped a meeting and was like, listen to the clock, I'd be like, yeah, I'm just mindful of time. Can we go on to the next agenda item? I don't have time to sit and listen to the clock.
What a weird insight there. And I mean, just really quickly, I just read this quote. We didn't get to it with Sean. We talked about the relationship between Labor and the Greens a little bit, but I did really want to hear what you think of this particular quote. Talk about the split between, reformists and revolutionaries and idealism and pragmatism and the conflict between Labor and the Greens. And Sean writes, I am certain that the hatred between the Greens is because each hates the other for being what they cannot be, for pointing to an absence in themselves. The Greens are pure and therefore impotent. They hate Labor for its compromises, but they hate it too because it has a history of achievements that the Greens will never have. I don't know about never have. Labor people, meanwhile, hate the Greens for standing in their way, for complaining that nothing Labor does is quite good enough, but they hate the Greens too because they know there is truth in the criticisms. There is a part of Labor MPs that would like to be pure and which hates that they are not.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty astute.
Pretty good summary.
It's almost astute enough to be somewhat obvious, I thought. I think that's totally true. It sucks to be in the Greens and seeing Labor do shit. And it's like the fact that they can, when they do shit, then they get to crow about it. And it's like, well, we would have done that. We would have done it 1,000,000 times better. So fuck you.
Good. All right. Great point. I'm glad I got that response from you. That's awesome. All right. Let's go. Let's talk to Sean.
Okay. Go, Sean.
All right. This is the final question. What do you stand for?
Okay, how much time?
You have 1 second to answer the question. It is a single word response.
Okay, tell me when it starts.
You may begin now.
Kindness.
The 100th quarterly essay was published last week and it explores the, quote, enigma of the Albanese government, what Albanese believes in, what Labor believes in. Our guest this week is, of course, its author, Sean Kelly. Welcome, Sean.
Hi, Sean.
Thanks so much for having me.
Lovely to have you. Can you give the listeners the brief, the intro to who you are and how you got here and why you wrote this essay, etc., in 30 seconds or less?
Well, long ago now, I was a Labor staffer. I worked for Nicola Roxon, who was Health Minister, and then Kevin Rudd, who was Prime Minister, and then Julia Gillard, who was also Prime Minister. And I know a lot of people will know those things, but they really are fading into ancient history now.
Oh, yeah. I remember those guys.
Yeah. I have been writing about politics for the last 10 or so years, and I was asked to write a quarterly essay, and I was thinking about the topic to write about for quite some time, and there were kind of two places it came from, two strands of thought, which I think I believed were separate, but are now very obviously connected. One was that I was driving to pick up my son from childcare one day, and I had a conversation with my grandfather's wife, who was a very politically minded woman, very politically astute person, and she asked me what I believed. And I realized in talking to her that I didn't have a great answer. I had little strands of thought, but I didn't have a really clearly articulated answer. And so that kind of started me down a rabbit hole of thinking, this is longer than 30 seconds, sorry, of thinking.
We'll just cut it down completely.
Great. Yeah, great. This will go for the next hour. What is belief? What is it? Is it a feeling? Is it a feeling that I have when you say something and I react with anger or passion? Or is it something I can say out loud? I believe in this exact balance between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome, or is it a bunch of specific policies I care about and believe in, or is it just a vibe inside me, a sense of morality maybe? Anyway, so that was one strand. And then the other thing that was going on at the same time, probably not coincidentally, is that I was watching the Albanese government. And of course, this is the first federal Labor government to be in power since I was a staffer, since I worked for the Rudd-Gillard government. And so that's been a very strange experience. It's been a very strange experience for a bunch of staffers from that time, I think, kind of realizing that we're being replaced in a way. Not a bad thing, just an interesting thing. And as I watch them, I think I can tell some of what they want to do and some of their beliefs. And I used to work with Anthony Albanese, and I think he is a man of integrity. I think he is a man of old school Labor beliefs. And I think you can see that on a lot of what the government does around Medicare and wages and workers. And as I write in the essay, there was something puzzling me. There was something missing or something mysterious. And when I thought about what that was, the word that I could come up with for it was belief. And so it kind of came from those two things, that sense of what is belief, and then this sense of not knowing what this government believed. And I think the reason I didn't know what the government believed is because I feel like there's always some sort of a gap between its words and its action, or your sense of what the government perhaps should be doing and its exact actions. And they're united. This is the very last bit of the answer, I promise. They're united because there's a philosopher called Daniel Dennett, and he tries to answer this question of what is belief. And he thinks that belief, it's not a feeling inside us. It's actually something you can observe in people's external actions. It is a pattern of behavior. That is how we know that somebody really believes something, when they act in accordance with it, when we can make predictions based on that belief, predictions of what they'll do. And I think that's the difficulty with this government. I think I can say what I think they believe and what they say they believe, but actually when I look at what they do, it's not always a very reliable guide to what they end up doing.
Did you feel like you knew what the Gillard and Rudd governments believed? Did you have a better sense of that when you were working there, or were you too much in the inside and just trying to survive day to day? Do you think this is a broader problem with the Labor Party in recent years, or is there a real difference between those two experiences?
No, that's such a good question. And this comes...
Thank you.
I definitely didn't know what it believed day to day. And it's not that I was thinking about that a great deal, because what happens when you're inside a government, especially government under pressure, as that one was, but I think any government, is you do become focused on day-to-day survival. It's very hard to break out of that mindset. In a way that makes it more important to have a true north. It makes it more important to have something that you can judge yourself against, compare yourself to, as you kind of go through every day. And you could ask yourself at the end of a day or a week or whatever, am I really doing that? But I'm not sure many people do, because they're focused on getting through. I think though, a thing that happens with history in general is the stories we tell ourselves about these things afterwards are often different from how they felt at the time. Sometimes they're more visible to us later on. I can look back at the Rudd-Gillard governments and I can identify certain things they did and certain directions they were heading in that now seem consistent and coherent in a way to me that perhaps they didn't at the time.
Interesting. Yeah, I thought it was, I was noticing the way that you talk about this idea of belief and almost, correct me if I'm wrong, almost conflating it or using it as interchangeably with ideology, because you talk about after the Cold War and the fall of the Berlin Wall, that people don't have these neat kind of labels or ideologies that they associate with. And that's also part of this broader falling identification with institutions, public institutions, civil institutions, groups of society. But some people would argue, I guess, that that ideology is a bit of a trap that can almost distract you from exploring your beliefs on each issue. And I find it hard to know sometimes where I land on that, because I agree with your points around, what Labor is doing at the moment, where they can kind of articulate policy by policy, this is what we're going to do on health, this is what we're going to do on education, but there's no coherent systemic change. Who are we kind of taking down? What's the big picture thing? But at the same time, to just be able to go, I'm a socialist or I'm a this, it means then maybe you don't have to think about what you believe as much.
Yeah, that is a big, complicated question.
Oh, not a good question. Tom's was a good one.
I just didn't feel like I could say good question twice in a row. I felt like it would be insincere. So I came up with a different adjective. Well, I've got a list here. I'm trying to remember the actual detail of the question rather than just the fact that it was complicated.
It was a typical rambling podcasty question, but it's like, is ideology, if you use ideology interchangeably with belief, also problematic? I think it can be. There is an argument that ideology per se can make you very rigid, and it can blind you to the details of individual policies. And, I think that is a useful argument for policymakers to bear in mind. It's a particularly useful argument for public servants to bear in mind. I think that there has been an unfortunate trend over the last 30 or so years in our politics, and it's related to the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fact that we couldn't talk about socialism anymore, which then I think in turn meant we didn't really talk about ideology, which then in turn meant we didn't treat our current society, our capitalist neoliberal society, as a choice. We just saw it as the way the world was. Exactly. And the trend that I'm referring to is the way that politicians have started to wear it as a badge of pride that they are non-ideological, that they are pragmatic or practical. And Scott Morrison used this phrase about himself a lot, and this Labor government also uses it. And that's it's not an Australian thing. I think it's an international thing, and that is because we started to prize the idea of technocratic governments. We started to prize the idea that things could be done in a way that was right, that was evidence-based, devoid of ideology. But for me, I think ideology is always at the heart of any question. And remember that the literary critic James Wood says the thing about
a true ideology is that it's invisible. And I'm sure he's not the first person to say that. So the thing about ideology is it's always there. There are always fundamental beliefs informing the way that we act, the way that governments act. It's really a question of whether or not they acknowledge them. And so for me, it's really worrying that centre-left governments in particular talk about themselves as managers, really, as pragmatic, practical people who want to do what works rather than the ideological solution, because that, to me, sounds as though they are simply slipping into the ideologies of their opponents. That they're not actually putting up much of a fight on the grounds of belief.
Which is rooted in the ideology of neoliberalism, right? Again, that the neoliberal era, that idea that, a whole bunch of questions about how the economy is organized and how it works and how society runs, that's just off the table. Yeah, that's not what we debate. We debate about how we manage the technocratic issues in between there. If I can just really quickly, when we're talking about ideology and Albanese, I mean, you're right here in the essay. Albanese describes himself today as progressive. In his maiden speech to Parliament, though, 29 years ago, Albanese described himself as a democratic socialist. The Labor Party still has democratic socialist in their constitution, so it's not too radical, but there you go. Early this year, Albanese was asked by the Squiz's Kate Watson what this meant. Albanese said, "What it means to be a member of the Labor Party, something I was drawn to. I say that I was raised with 3 great faiths." And there's this huge rambling answer that basically, in which he completely avoids the question of, like, what does it actually mean to be a democratic socialist? What you have to say about capitalism and the way that it produces and maintains inequality. He just completely dodged that, and you sort of pick apart his response. And just another piece of response here. If you put the sort of at an extreme on the left spectrum, government has a role to look after people. On the right spectrum, if government just gets out of the way and disappears, then people will be better off. Now, I tend towards government does have a role in looking after people and in looking after shaping the economy as well, where the market failure occurs. Really, run to the barricades kind of stuff. Really inspiring. Words there.
Well, and defining that as Labor. That is the Labor Party. Like what he answers, he's like, my beliefs are just Labor.
Right. Yes. That's where it gets to this kind of circular definition. We're Labor because we're Labor because we're Labor. It's kind of a brand.
I know you're in Labor. I'm aware.
We're across that. That's another quote from the essay. Earlier this year, Jim Chalmers described the government as centrist. I put the same label to Albanese in 2023. He replied, "I think we're Labor."
Wow. Groundbreaking.
I think this comes back to the death of socialism, or the death of socialism as a practiced experiment in those countries. I think after that, the left got really embarrassed. I think large tracts of the left, and certainly centre-left governments, centre-left parties of government, became very embarrassed about putting forward a clear description of what they believed, because they were deprived of the way they traditionally described themselves. We forget, I think, that it wasn't that long ago that the Labor Party openly described itself as socialist. Didn't mean Soviet-style socialism. It meant equality in a broad sense, and as you say, Tom, it's still in the party's platform in the Constitution, but nobody talks about this anymore. And again, this is a broad international thing.
Doug Cameron did before he retired, before he was left. He was waving the flag.
And isn't he so scathing of the left of the party now? I don't know how much you've talked about this, but he's been out there saying the left of the Labor Party has been defanged. Like really, really strong language. And I do think, this is something really interesting about the connection between language and belief and policy and action. If you can't explain what you believe, if you are embarrassed, then at some point, if you stop explaining it, I think you kind of forget. And you begin to move towards a point at which you don't have something clear that you can identify that you believe. Now, it doesn't mean that feeling inside you is gone. It doesn't mean that you're not outraged at inequality or outraged at unfairness. And those are obviously still really useful feelings to have. But you need something outside of yourself as well to hold yourself to account. And that's not just true of political parties. That's true of all of us, I think. I think we all struggle to live in the world, right? We all have beliefs and feelings, and we have to live in the world. And that's actually a very difficult thing, because the world makes it very hard, doesn't stop us completely, but makes it very hard for us to always act in concert with what we think we believe. And
Yeah.
the same is true of political parties. And that's why you actually need to have that clear description somewhere in your mind, or for a political party written down somewhere, so that you can remind yourself of it. And really interestingly, I don't write this in the essay, but as I was writing it, a speechwriter for the party, so somebody who has written speeches for the party, was saying to me that they believe that speeches, when Labor politicians give speeches, they are reminding themselves of why they joined the party. Those speeches are where they articulate beliefs and often talk about the history of the party, and that's kind of their own little attempt at accountability.
Yeah, interesting. I mean,
Cool. Could they also keep that in mind when passing laws?
When
That would be
doing
my
stuff.
No, absolutely.
feedback. Not just
Yeah,
the
that would be
speeches,
good.
but also when you're sitting down and doing the governing.
Doing shit.
That's when we really let's get those speeches out.
And
Have another little read.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, a lot of the time you look at the speeches that they give, and I wouldn't say that they're articulating a very clear ideology or
Also fair.
belief system. But I mean, one of the things that I really wanted to talk about in your essay, and it's where I struggle a bit, because I feel as though there's this presumed frame of like a dichotomy between, or a contrast between, pragmatism and idealism, as you put it. And you talk about that that being waged within Labor for a long time, and then the Greens coming along and them kind of presenting that countervailing force of idealism versus pragmatism. But maybe where I struggle is because I would like to believe, and I think the argument that we often try to make on this podcast or within the Greens as well, is that pragmatism can be pursuing your beliefs, pursuing your ideology, pursuing, a socialism with the belief that you can win seats doing that. Like, I guess what I would ask you is, do you believe that there is actually a pragmatic approach to electoral politics that is based on, that uses advocacy and uses politics to bring people along with a project of maybe utopianism, maybe idealism, but socialism, and says, like, convinces them, so that people will vote for something that will actually help them, the vast majority of people.
Or at least, at the very least, something well beyond what we've come to expect from the
fucking better.
neoliberal status quo.
Yeah.
Yeah, like something actually radically different, or something more. Yeah.
Both of you, great question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I think absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I believe that. In the essay, I sketch out this dichotomy, as you say, and it is historic within Labor, between this idealism on one hand and pragmatism on the other. And I should say, when I talk about pragmatism in relation to Labor, there, I guess what I'm very specifically talking about is winning elections, and even further than that, what I'm talking about, I guess, is an attitude that has prevailed in Labor's right faction for a very long time. Which was summed up in that Graham Richardson quote, "Whatever it takes." There's a sense of ruthlessness there about winning elections. I 100% believe that there is a pragmatic, electorally sophisticated approach to elections, which also involves wearing your beliefs on your sleeve. And in fact,
And being left wing. Actually being left wing and actually winning elections on left wing ideas and economics.
Yeah, I do. It depends. Not in every election, not in every electorate, obviously. But do I believe that's possible? For sure. Obviously, the debate is around the measure, the level of compromise, I suppose, you believe is acceptable or advisable, how much compromise you are willing to make, because I think everybody in politics, in any party, makes some compromise. So how much compromise you are willing to make before you have well and truly compromised yourself, compromised your values, started to depart from the reason you thought it was important to get involved in politics in the first place. And, I think that's a really difficult question. For the Labor Party, what I write in there is I think that struggle between the two is really important, by which I mean a centre-left party like the Labor Party can't afford to give up either of those poles. It always has to have one eye on winning elections, one eye, and it always has to have one eye on idealism because, I mean, for both, to take your question into account, for both pragmatic and idealistic reasons, if you give up that idealism, who are you? Why are you doing this? Also, if you give up that idealism, I don't think there's much of a reason for people to vote for you. That is your identity, I think, if you're a party of the left. And you're obviously talking about the Greens, and of course, in some circumstances, making the really strong left-wing argument is also going to be the more electorally smart thing to do. And in fact, we have just seen a very good example of that in New York.
Yeah. And in the UK, like the way that, the UK Greens are polling shows that you can do that, which is why I think, I wanted to maybe gently push back on, like, when we talk about Labor making quote unquote pragmatic decisions about electorally because they want to represent the vast majority of interests. And I'm like, but the vast majority of interests, we have to remember, like, it really is only a tiny minority of interests who are benefited by maintaining the current economic system.
Good point.
So I'm like,
particularly when this idea about being pragmatic and winning elections is exposed as a lie, when we have forces within the Labor Party or the Democrats in the US that are actively hostile to winning left-winger candidates, right? So Zohran Mamdani wins and the Democratic establishment says, win, but not like that. Not with something that will actually change the status quo. Jeremy Corbyn wins leadership of the Labor Party twice, and despite all the odds, increases the Labor vote in 2017, and people within his party go, oh, fuck, he could actually win. We have to sabotage him as much from the inside, right? If Labor and the Greens had an agreed goal, ideological goal of like the kind of society we were going for, and Labor was like, oh, it's all about winning elections, well, in Parliament, they would be like, well, let's work together with the Greens to pass really progressive legislation. That's not what happens. So, I agree with that analysis. I just throw that complication out there to also remember that I think there are people in the Labor Party in Australia and in those other parties in the UK and the US that are actively hostile to democratic socialism and more radical change, even if it proves to be electorally successful.
Well, I mean, and that's because the sole difference between the Greens and the Labor Party is not just about the level of compromise, right? It's not just about Labor is willing to be more quote unquote pragmatic, quoting myself there, I guess. The difference is also one of ideology. The Greens are further to the left. The Labor Party is more conservative. That, like, actually in what they believe as a group on average and what they pursue.
Yeah. Something I was thinking about, which you didn't, I mean, obviously the essay is about Labor and Albanese. It's not about the Greens. I'm reading it with my Greens hat on, but
great.
Thinking about the way that you, and you really articulate this quite well, the fact that Labor has for so long been defined by opposition. Like, Albanese himself, he's very well known for that line, I love fighting Tories. That's what I do. And now they have kind of a new opposition in that, like Labor's new opponent is the Greens. And you critique, I guess, the way that perhaps Labor has allowed itself to be defined in opposition to the Greens, just as then being anti-purity or anti-idealism. But then I was thinking about, have the Greens made a similar mistake just defining themselves only in opposition in 2025? And I don't know if you read Max Chandler-Mather's interview with James Massola, I think it was, in the 9 Fairfax papers, but reflecting on the federal election, and the Greens strategy was keep Dutton out, keep the Greens in, keep Dutton out, to kind of show that, well, we're not a threat, we're not going to create an LNP government, and that just then played into Labor's hands because the Greens weren't saying, what do we stand for? Like, did we make the same mistake, basically?
I think so. I think that's absolutely true. And
how dare you?
I think it is always dangerous when any political party defines itself mostly in opposition to another party. And the truth is we have a history of this in Australia. So it is how parties define themselves. The historian Judith Brett has written about the way that the Liberal Party defines itself as not being Labor. And I write in this essay about Labor's history, and I'm drawing on other, I'm drawing on historians here who say that Labor has defined itself as not liberal. So in a way, this kind of reactiveness is a natural thing. And of course it is, right? We all, in shaping our identities, define ourselves against other people. That's what we're doing when we're teenagers onwards, right? And we look at other groups and we dress in a different way and we don't dress that way. Like, we're always defining ourselves by boundaries. That makes sense. But in politics, you are offering things to people as well, right? Yes. You have to offer things to voters. And when you're making an offering, I think voters want to know what it is you want to do. They want to know what type of a world you want to create. And I think there is always a danger of too much oppositionality. I think Labor got close to it and kind of rescued itself near to the last election, and was kind of rescued by Peter Dutton as well. But I think that was a really interesting article with James Massola.
But and you have a great insight in the essay, I think, Sean, when you talk about the way Albanese frames himself as to what he's opposed to. So when he's asked, what do you mean by fighting Tories? He means, well, it means hanging on to the gains that we've already won. So that's things like Medicare, the social democratic wins that Labor Party is responsible for in the past. It's like, we've got to defend them from the Tories, which is an interesting framing, rather than saying, hey, we should expand Medicare, we should bring in dental or something, or what are you for? What do you want to change about the way Australia is currently organised to make it more progressive, to make it more inclusive, to seriously address inequality? He doesn't seem to sort of go there.
Yeah, I mean, to bring it back to your point before, Emerald, I watched a bit of Sarah Hanson-Young on Insiders on the weekend, and I didn't watch all of it, but for me, a really strong moment was when she offered an alternative to the social media stuff. Her critiques weren't so convincing to me because it felt like she was kind of dodging around the topic a little bit, but then she said, but we could do this. And when you're putting forward ideas, it's always a really strong thing. Now, I think that's particularly true of government. Paul Keating used to talk about being the roadrunner. You be the roadrunner, and Wile E. Coyote, the opposition, will never catch you because you'll burn up the road behind you. And I love that quote. I think it's true of government, but I think it's true of everyone in politics, really. If you're putting forward ideas, you can force other people to react to you, and in a more positive way, you are putting ideas into the national debate.
Yeah.
And they don't always get debated, but maybe they do. So in relation to what you're saying, Tom, I think that this government has always been strongest when it has put forward ideas. I think it was strong, even though it ultimately failed when it was campaigning for The Voice, because there was an idea. And I realised, there was very good complex debate to be had about The Voice and the way that referendum unfolded. But I think fundamentally putting an idea out there, or backing in somebody else's idea, was an interesting, important intervention. I think when they broke the promise on the stage 3 tax cuts, again, that is putting forward policy and forcing other people to debate it. And in that case, dragging the debate just a little bit towards inequality. They still wouldn't really talk about inequality in relation to it, which brings it back to this overall point and the point you just made, which is that the government does not actually want to talk about what it is trying to do, which is often it's a weird, frustrating thing watching the Albanese government, because it feels as though they're trying to kind of change the country by stealth at times. And I think a really open question in my mind is, I don't know whether that's possible or not. Maybe it is. Maybe, obviously their strategy is partly, and they said this openly in the first year of government, like they did not want to frighten the horses. They wanted to get policies through, but they didn't really want debate. And that is a strategy they've persisted with. It means a lot of the time, as I said at the start of this, they don't go for big policies. They go for smaller policies. They go for policies that won't create fights. And that might work. Maybe they add up over time. But there's another part of me that thinks if you really want to change the country, at some point you need to be open with people about how you're changing the country. And the reason for that is that for change to really last and be embedded, people need to understand why it's there, and they need to shift in their conception of the country. John Howard did a few different things. He used rhetoric.
Sorry, he did one of those things.
Yeah.
So we like about him. He got shit done. That's what I've always respected about John Howard.
But he did, right? And he used rhetoric. He used rhetoric like relaxed and comfortable. And I think that phrase really lodged itself in the national psyche, right? And then he matched that complacency with a bunch of policy, and that's how you change the country. It's the rhetoric, the imposition of that rhetoric and that image on us, and the policy to match it. And this government has some policy, but not big policy that you'll notice, and it doesn't really have that rhetoric most of the time. It has it occasionally. It has little bits of it.
Yeah.
But most of the time, not so you'd notice.
Yeah. I think it's funny because it's, as someone who also works in politics, you've worked in politics, it's a hard argument to make, to be instead of just being reactive or playing into so much political decision making in Australia, particularly, I feel, is based on the idea that people are scared and they vote primarily based on fear. And part of me also believes that's true. And so it's so easy to go, well, we just need to make people feel less scared so that they'll vote for us. But at the same time, I also think people will respect you when you say what you believe in and act accordingly. I do think that, people will respect that.
Even if you fail. Even if you fail.
Exactly. And that's why I really like your kind of points around promises and Albanese being really reticent to make promises that he might not be able to keep, but that making the promise itself can actually be a really positive thing to do. I did want to ask you, it feels like an open question to me in the essay, Albanese specifically, where you're like, is it that he doesn't really know what he believes? Maybe brackets anymore, ? Or is he just too afraid to say it right now and doing the, not frightening the horses thing? Which do you think it is? Does he not know, or is he just too scared?
I think it is my suspicion is it is a deliberate choice about how to exercise power. And it comes back to the point I was just making about stealth, that I think his view of how to exercise power at this point in time and what he sees as a complicated, chaotic reform landscape, very polarized, is that you have to go slowly, you have to go lightly, and that not saying large things as much as not doing large things is the way to get things through. That talking about socialism would just be jumped on, even democratic socialism would be jumped on by the Murdoch press. And he's not entirely wrong. Now, I don't think the Murdoch press has as much power as it used to.
Yeah, agree.
And this, this comes back to a point I make in the essay about the deep scarring that I think this government has from the Rudd-Gillard years. And I think they are still jumping at shadows because of what happened during those years. I think they're capable of more than they've really allowed themselves to believe.
Man, I just think he believes whatever he has to believe. When he says, I think we're Labor, it's just that's everything you need to know to me. That's whatever Labor is doing, whatever is going to help Labor, then we're good to go. Then I'm because to me the question about beliefs is, what is your red line? And you're right. I think you're right in the essay. Beliefs are only truly demonstrated when they're tested. Okay, and when you have something on the line here, and you need to say, no, I won't do that because of my commitment to a certain belief. And from my point of view, again and again, we have seen a Labor government and Albanese personally who was happy to to abandon causes, to throw things under the bus, to be like, nah, particularly on Gaza. You touched briefly on foreign policy in the essay, but it's not a focus of your essay. But, to me, the most egregious crime of the Labor government is their complicity in the genocide over the past couple of years. And Labor hacks and supporters just being completely okay with that or ignoring it entirely, which I think is really disgraceful and shameful. And to me, if genocide is not your line, then fucking hell. But that's my read on this guy's collection of beliefs. Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't occasionally do good things, and I'm sure he believes good things that he and I would agree on. But it's just like, well, how firmly are you committed to the belief if you are prepared to throw it overboard as soon as it gets tested, or it might go against his greater belief in the institution of the Labor Party and making sure they maintain power. I mean, again, if I can quote you here. Without some articulated ideal, the only measure against which you can be judged becomes time in office. How many elections did you win? You can then point at what was done and say, there, we achieved exactly what was possible. And that's definitely the vibe you get from Labor folks. It's like, hey, we won elections, so it all worked out great. There you go.
Right. So I think it's important to distinguish between a couple of things, which is the danger that not having that articulated ideal poses, as I wrote there, and what you're saying about Albanese and what Albanese's personal feelings and approach and belief are. And look, impossible to know for sure, of course. And every politician, I think especially every prime minister, makes compromises, and often they're not sufficiently aware of those compromises. I don't mean they're ignorant to the compromises. I mean they're not sufficiently aware of the way in which they're compromising their beliefs. Obviously, I write in the piece this sense of I am Labor sounds a bit circular. I think it is more genuinely meant when Albanese says it. I don't think he's using it as some type of a trick. I think for him it comes back to that way many people would feel, which is our belief lives here in our chest, right? So when he says,
I know what,
Labor,
like when I say Labor, I feel it, and you feel it too. Almost,
exactly. I think he knows. Yeah, I think he feels he knows what that means. And I personally, I think that is genuine. Now, is that actually ultimately useful in government? Probably only in a very limited way, because ultimately the truth of being in government is you are confronted with difficult situations all the time. You are confronted with constraints on doing what you believe. And so in tune with the exact quote you just read out, Tom, I think you do in the end lose a way of holding yourself to account. When you're Prime Minister, of course, that's very difficult, because who exactly is going to hold you to account, which is where you get to this other difficulty, which is that he doesn't have a very active caucus. It's hard to tell whether he has an active cabinet that is challenging him. We obviously don't have a very effective opposition challenging him. So that question of like pushing him back towards his beliefs or towards effective government, that there aren't those forces that you would need because every Prime Minister compromises. I think the other thing I think, I'm not making this argument, but I understand the argument that government would make. And the argument the government would make is an argument that, Prime Ministers, since there have been Prime Ministers, have argued, which is I make some compromises in pursuit of being in power a little bit longer so that we can deliver more of our agenda. And obviously, the government believes it has a significant agenda, and that, for me, is the real point to question: is the government's agenda genuinely significant? Because you can make that argument about a single compromise, right? The question is, does it happen every single time? Do you compromise every single time? Do you stop short of the best answer every single time? And we are obviously far enough into this government to begin making some judgments without, in my mind, being far enough to be completely conclusive about that.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of you finish the essay by presenting a few options for how the legacy of this government could play out or develop, basically. And they are, first, that, quote, its gradualism will, over time, reveal itself as a reasonably significant agenda that has been accumulating. And you kind of make the case for this with a couple of examples, like Australia's relationship with the US, which I think was interesting. Like, is that, I mean, I get the sense that you're still kind of on the fence on this, and you're kind of making both arguments that, this could be revealed ultimately to have been a grand plan that's unfolding and they did it by stealth. Or it could be, as you say, quote, an underwhelming series of missed opportunities. Actually, I wrote that. I don't know if that's an exact quote.
It's pretty close.
But yeah, something like that. Or maybe Albanese will switch it up. At some point he'll, quote, break free and do more. And you present these all as maybe equally possible. But there's also like a secret fourth option that you talk about, right? The lightness thing?
Yeah, which is that it is this idea that we're in a polarized time and that the way to get things done is to kind of just touch down very lightly. I write about Perseus, who was a demigod. I think his father was Zeus, and he had the winged sandals and he killed Medusa, and Medusa had the hair that was snakes, and you couldn't look directly at Medusa or you'd turn to stone. So what he did is he just looked at her reflection in his shield. And then once he killed her and cut off her head, he carried her head round in a sack, which is pretty gruesome. But the point is that he always carried her with him. And when the novelist Italo Calvino writes about this, he's essentially saying, well, Perseus carried the world with him, but didn't look directly at it. And he's using that, I think, as a way of talking about writing fiction. But I think it's interesting to think about in relation to politics as well, that I think in some ways that's what Albanese has done. And I think you can see this on America. He's not really dealing with the Trump fascist question. He's not really directly talking about Trump and the very many dangers of being in alliance with a leader like that. But he is taking some small steps away from America, forging stronger relationships with China, refusing to match America on defense spending. And I think this is true potentially on a whole bunch of policy areas where you can argue that in today's landscape, if you made big moves, they would simply split the country into two and you would never get anywhere. We're not in the 1980s anymore. You have to pursue things a bit differently. Now, I think this argument is probably misguided, which is, I think, comes through a bit in the end of the essay. But I try to keep a really open mind. I do, and the reason for that is for the simple reason that we are not at the end of the government yet, and because I don't think the government has been hopeless, and I don't think it's been empty and absent of belief in the way, say, Scott Morrison's government was. I think you can point to some important things it's done on industrial relations, on wages more broadly. I think the Medicare stuff is potentially useful. The childcare moves, I think, could add up over time, and exactly the way government talks about incrementalism working. There is some potentially significant stuff there, and there are huge areas that worry me. The biggest one being inequality.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that Albanese, on the one hand, strengthening ties with China or refusing to match defense spending with the US, while on the other hand, basically cozying up to Trump in many ways is actually not so much like clever, light, incremental strategy, but just inconsistency and a bit
You totally could.
Well, also, like, what other choice does he have when it comes to China, really? And he is full steam ahead with AUKUS. So this is actually part of the essay that was a little bit like, really? Albanese is taking a brave stand against... I think he's certainly capitalizing on anti-Trump sentiment, which is extremely strong in Australia when it serves him electorally. But on the real shit, on this recent deal where we have to spend trillions of dollars of our super money in America and these rare materials and full steam ahead of AUKUS, I see very little evidence that he's taking a brave stand and separating ourselves from America, even though the CIA killed Golf Whitlam. So,
Golf Whitlam.
Anyway, sorry if you want to respond to that. I don't know.
Oh no, I think that's totally legitimate. I think, honestly, the very many arguments I put forward in this essay, I could be wrong on all of them in different directions.
Sean, what do you believe? Tell us.
Exposed.
Very meta.
100% very meta. I really struggle with this government. I really struggle, and it's partly because they won't say what they're trying to do, right? Because they won't say what they're trying to do at either a large aerial belief sense, declaring they're socialists or whatever, and because they won't do it even in a shorter way, right? The Prime Minister talks about not wanting to commit to things because they might not be achieved and that will disillusion people. Now, I don't really buy this argument at all. But my point is that they won't even declare short-term goals. So it's very hard sometimes to know whether the government is getting where they want to go because they kind of don't tell us. And then in the areas that they do, emissions targets, housing targets, renewable energy targets, the signs are not conclusive, but the signs are not very promising. So, they leave me confused a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is a great question. What is Labor's vision of the good life? Or alternatively, what is its view of the life we are leading now with our broken education system, our broken housing system, our deteriorating health system, our rising inequality? Topic by topic, Labor declares it wants to fix these problems. But problems like these do not exist in isolation. They are built on a foundation of assumptions about what is acceptable and what is not, about what is set in stone and what might still be changed, about the way things work. On the broader question of the society in which they all exist and are related, we do not hear much. I feel like that sort of nails it pretty well. Again, like without a governing ideology, without a broader structural analysis and critique with the problems with the country, as you say, if Australia's pretty good already, which is also something Scott Morrison liked to say, how much do you want to change, really?
I think centre-left parties of government, quote unquote, have been in this quandary for a while. The historian Gary Gerstle writes about Tony Blair and Bill Clinton essentially coming after Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and accepting their ideologies, accepting neoliberalism as the way things would be. And I think if you look in Australia, Kevin Rudd, with a long monthly article, tried to kind of pick apart some of the neoliberal beliefs and maybe did a little bit with this hugely Keynesian approach to stimulus during the 2008 financial crisis. Big building projects there, obviously. This government talks a little bit about that, but really I think whether it's this government or the Democrats or the Labor Party in the UK, they're all kind of still caught in this neoliberal sense. And in a way, things have got even worse for them because I think the right has largely moved away from that or is beginning to move away from that, is beginning to see the problems. And you can see this in Trump. Like Trump absolutely is tearing apart the Republicans' commitment to the neoliberal doctrine. And that leaves Democrats, Labor and Labor, the defenders of institutions, which kind of sounds fine when you think about them as democratic institutions, when you think about them as the courts and the parliament. But actually, it ends up being all the capitalist institutions as well, or the neoliberal institutions. They've kind of just become defenders of the world as it is right now.
Yeah.
Defenders of the status quo. And, this is, Tom, you're talking about the way I pick apart Albanese's rhetoric. One of the patterns I began to notice in his rhetoric was a really conservative pattern. When he talks about the Australian way, what he's really talking about is not becoming more American. And when he talks about, I like fighting Tories, he was asked to define that, and he said it means not giving up the gains that have been made.
Yeah.
Both of those phrases are about protecting Australia from change. And you can make a positive argument for that, but that is a conservative thing. That is not what centre-left parties have traditionally done. But that's kind of where that's the corner they've argued themselves into, because they have become the defenders of neoliberalism, if you like. And I think that leaves them in this very confused state, because I don't think they like everything about it. I think they can see some of the problems, but they can't quite tear themselves away from it either. So you're left with this, what I think is a horribly banal situation where politicians like Albanese will say things like, I believe in markets. Every time a centre-left leader says that, a little part of me dies, And it's not that markets have no value. It just seems like such a milquetoast way of...
It's
am I saying that right? Maybe I'm not.
What do you fucking want, Sean? You want to know what he believes in? He tells you he believes in markets and he's still not fucking happy. Jesus,
good
mate.
enough. I think, and that quote that Tom read out, right, it is both a perfect encapsulation of this critique of Labor being unable to articulate what they think about the world that we live in right now and what they might like to change about it. It's also a great articulation of the problems that most people are experiencing, or the shitty parts of the world that we're living in right now for the vast majority of people, which means that we are in a current, political and economic, under the conditions that we are in right now are ripe for someone to stand up in politics and say, this is what's wrong and this is how we could fucking change it. And you're right that it is bizarrely the right that are meant to be the conservatives that are somehow doing that more effectively than the left in many cases. But it also means that, I do see a bit of glimmer of hope for leftist parties like the Greens to step in and be the ones who do that. And yes, to not fall into the trap of just defining ourselves in opposition, whether it's to the LNP or to Labor even, but by articulating what we believe in about the whole of our society and our economic system right now and what the alternative might be.
So I have a question. I don't mean this as a challenge. I mean this as somebody who doesn't follow what the Greens are doing as closely as you do.
Yeah.
Do you feel as though...
It's true.
87% based on the latest poll.
Sorry.
Do you feel that the Greens are in some cases articulating that alternative?
Absolutely in some cases, but less effectively, not effectively enough in recent elections. I think that's quite clear. And I will say there have been cases where we have tried to articulate that effectively and it hasn't necessarily worked. We haven't won elections. I think we did that in the Queensland state election. I'm from Queensland, so that's what I go to, and didn't necessarily work. But what was interesting about that election is we had a Queensland Labor government that really was articulating a vision and a belief. Like Stephen Miles was like, we're going to nationalize petrol stations. We, 50-cent fares. We've got this plan to to transition all of our state-owned coal-fired power stations to renewable energy hubs. And people that was quite popular. Obviously it didn't win the election. But I think that's where I'm like, it's true that we didn't do it effectively enough in the federal election, possibly by having the main frame that was communicated as Keep Dutton Out. I've said before on the podcast, to be honest, I don't really know, though, how we could have made a different decision in the context of that election. It seemed to be the right one for framing for the Greens to take because the threat of Dutton felt so real to so many of the Greens' potential voters. But I think that, if the Greens want to grow and see more success, they need to be really quite firm and deliberate in not just being caught up in responding to what the government's doing, as shit as it may be, not just be caught up in responding to the bullshit that the Conservatives are doing, but saying, this is what we want to do. And this is what is we see happening in your everyday lives. And this is what could be done better.
Look, the truth is we might just historically, and this is a bit bleak, but might just be at a point where we don't know what that next thing is yet, what the stage just beyond neoliberalism is yet. The Marxist thinker Perry Anderson writes about the fact that these doctrines have normally come from little fringe groups kind of pottering away on the edges of society, and then somebody wins power and these ideas are ready for them. But I don't know if those ideas are ready somewhere out on the fringes of society yet. And they're not. I don't think they're very often generated within political parties. Political parties might take them up and put them into practice, and that's obviously very important. But I'm not sure they happen within political parties as a general rule.
Well, of course, we're in this strange position in which we kind of want to return to some old ideas, which is the social welfare state for the post-war World War II. Right now, whether that is achievable or how different our vision for this world would be. But again, Adam Ban would regularly talk about a social democratic program that would be almost entirely aligned with a post-World War II Labor Party policy platform before the neoliberal turn. Some basic things, some identification of the profit motive and privatization and deregulation as being at the heart of why people's lives are so miserable, why things are so expensive, the corruption of our democracy. We'd actually like to return to that way of thinking. I
think things. Well, I think also new things is in terms of progress on a 4-day work week, as I've spoken about. I think that there need to be improvements to life that are not just back to a few of the things we used to have, right?
Back to the 50s with less
Of course. I mean, I think a really interesting thing is going to happen over the next. Sorry, Tom. Sorry to skate over that. That was an important point you were making.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I'm going to be cancelled for talking over you, and that's fair enough. There are interesting things happening, I think, in the degree of interaction with government and government agencies that is going to happen over the next few decades. If you think about the way that aged care has become a necessary and accepted part of the life cycle at this stage, very different from 50 years ago. If you think of the way that childcare is now bordering on compulsory,
Yes.
it means that most people are interacting with the government, well, really with private operators providing services on behalf of the government. And I think that's really interesting because I think it means that the huge deficiencies in private provision of services are going to become more and more obvious in the most important aspects of many of our lives. You know, lots of people will tell you they care about their children above anything else. They care about their parents very, very much, their elderly parents. And if we start to see problems in the way those two groups, well, we are already seeing massive problems in the way those two groups of people are already treated. I think that is going to flow into the general attitude towards privatised provision of services.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Yes.
I hope so. I mean, again, if you were like, okay, what is Albanese's big, bold idea that he will be remembered for? He would say, you know, it is the achievement, if he can do it, of universal childcare. But we know that when he says that, he means that it's not free at the point of service and that there will still be private providers and for-profit providers within that system. That, which to me undermines the idea of a big, bold idea would be nationalising and making childcare like our public education system. But that to me is beyond the pale for Albanese and for this Labor government because they believe in markets.
And of course, the public school system is also in significant.
It's also having a lot of troubles. Yeah,
being treated very well.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, but this is the thing. Like the greatest Labor legacy of Medicare, even that is a semi-privatized system and not entirely universal. Obviously, doesn't include dental and mental. So, I mean, yes, you can see that that is arguably a pretty strong legacy that is still not the ideal. But it'll be. I'm interested to see if Albanese does shift closer towards a universal proposal on childcare.
I think what you're saying, Emerald, is there some type of a conflict between ideals and pragmatism?
I would never say anything like that. It's just not what I believe. You see, I'm a socialist. Easy.
Easy done.
So easy.
But I'll tell you what the lesson from Medicare is that it wasn't fucking conflict free, right? So the idea that you can just be like, oh, it's a win-win, and that we're hearing this framing around the nature reforms as well. It's a win-win. Business and nature can win. No, people hated Medicare. They fought against it. The Tories tried to stop it. They got rid of it. Fraser got rid of it before Hawke brought it back. Like, you are going to have a fight because if you pass reforms that isn't vigorously opposed by the powerful interests in the society, it probably doesn't mean shit. The shit that actually matters will create conflict, and you got to take that fight on. And I reckon when you've got 93 seats across the board and the opposition is in absolute chaos, might be a good time to do that.
Might be a good time to do it.
And I should say that is a big part of the essay, right? That's this government avoids conflict, and I'm not sure how you change the inequity in our society without conflict. I just don't see how that happens.
Yes, I enjoyed that. Look, I think we have probably taken up enough of your time, so people will just have to go and read the essay to hear more about that. Where can people find it and you and your work and all that, Sean?
Oh, look, if you Google quarterly essay, it's the 100th. It's called The Good Fight. It's available at bookstores or newsagents if you can find one, or you can buy an e-copy. There will, in fact, be any minute now an audio version, me reading it.
Oh, you wrote?
If you enjoy these dulcet tones, they're available at a cost.
Beautiful. I would really recommend it. I think it was a great read, and I reckon people who like this podcast and particularly Danger Dogs, those who are supporters on Patreon, will be really into it. So do check it out if you get a chance. But thank you very much for talking to us about it, Sean. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for talking to me. Thanks for prodding me on it. I appreciate it.
Of course. We love to prod.
We're playing our typical Greens role. That's what we do. We agitate from the
Excellent.
left.
Serious danger to Australia.